Hello, so this is day 2 of my Bookmas. I am doing a very casual take on Bookmas. I am just kind of talking about books each day. I'm not really doing as much of a vloggy style since I have a young daughter. I'm running around after her all day and I don't really want to put her on camera. So I've just been thinking of fun little bookish takes or casual book talks to talk about every day. And since I've been wanting to do this video all month and I've just never got around to it, I thought I would talk about my nonfiction recommendations since it is November and nonfiction November is a thing. So I have a bunch of books here and I've kind of broken it up into categories. 4 categories that I have made is celebrity memoir, since that is such a big part of nonfiction, the nonfiction industry. And I do enjoy a celebrity memoir, just a regular memoir. So these are for just non-celebrity people talking about their life. And then I have the quirky nonfiction recs, since I like to read kind of weird, quirky history or science. And then my last one is more challenging. So these are nonfiction recs that maybe are not for the beginner nonfiction reader, but they're more for people that maybe read more nonfiction. Let's start with celebrity memoir. So I am kind of trying to stay away from the popular picks that are recommended over and over again. So the ones that I can kind of think of that come to mind that I hear recommended over and over again are I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, Finding Me by Viola Davis, the Britney Spears Woman in Me, Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey is a really popular one. So there's a lot of celebrity memoirs that I've seen kind of make the rounds, or I've seen them a lot in bookstores where I don't really feel like I should recommend those ones since they've already probably been recommended to you a million times. So my first rec for the celebrity memoir that are a little off the beaten track that not as many people I feel like are recommending is Ann Patchett's These Precious Days. So this is kind of on the fence a little bit because Ann Patchett is not necessarily a celebrity, but she's a very famous writer, and I feel like in the writing world, she is her own little celebrity. She owns a bookstore in Nashville called Parnassus Books, and she has a big book that comes out every year. And so I am going to consider her a celebrity. And a lot of these book recs that I'm trying to give are recent books that I've read. So this one I read this year, and this is a collection of essays about life. They're about different moments in her life where the importance of your connection and the people around you and just taking in that moment are so important. So there's just so many nice stories in here, and they're bittersweet, but they really just examine life and what makes life special. And I really enjoyed this book. As you can see, I tabbed it quite a bit this year. Let me see if I can just open to a random quote that I could read. I've interviewed more authors than you could even imagine. Many of them sleep at my house. I promote the books I love tirelessly because a book can so easily get lost in the mad shuffle of the world, and it needs someone with a loud voice to hold it up and praise it. I am that person. So how sweet is that? That's kind of perfect for this video too, since I am trying to recommend you books, and she is the biggest book recommender in the industry, or one of the biggest. So anyways, that's Ann Patchett's These Precious Days. I think this is such a great book. It's such an easy, quick read, and it just really is sentimental and gets to the heart of a lot of things. So I really loved this one. And then my other book, correct, that is a celebrity memoir. I don't actually have a copy. I am going to buy myself a copy of it when it goes onto paperback. And that is The Friday Afternoon Club, a family memoir by Griffin Dunne. You probably haven't heard of Griffin Dunne, but he is an actor that you probably would recognize his face. He has a lot of smaller supporting kind of character roles in a lot of movies and shows that you have probably watched. And his family is very famous. His last name is Dunne, and he is related to, I believe his name is Gregory Dunne, who was married to Joan Didion, the famous writer. So not only does he have famous people in his family, including his dad who's an actor and other people, but he also is rubbing shoulders and growing up in Hollywood and friends with a lot of famous people. His best friend growing up was Carrie Fisher. And there's so many fun little anecdotes in this about moments where different famous people have come in and out of his life, and he has funny stories to tell. It kind of shows the brash, like blunt, hard side of Hollywood in acting, and it doesn't really try to sugarcoat it. Although he does name drop a lot of famous people, he does so in a way, I feel like, to humanize him or humanize them and make them seem like normal people. And although some of these people he's very in awe of, he just brings them in through his stories like they were just part of everyday life, like they're just another regular person. And I kind of liked that element of it. And then another big part of this book is his sister, who was an actress at the time, was brutally murdered by her ex-boyfriend, and it was a big publicized court case that was on the news, and he had to live out in the public eye. And he talks about that, with dealing with that with his family and going through that court case and kind of the fallout from that. So not only is it talking about him growing up, but it talks about a pivotal traumatic moment in his life that really changed how his family came together and kind of how they fell apart as well. So it's really, really interesting. I really enjoyed it. I think it was a really fun read, and I'm glad I read it, and I'm definitely picking up a copy when I can get my hands on a paperback. So those are kind of like the two celebrity memoirs I wanted to talk about. Now I'm going to go into just kind of regular memoirs. So these are memoirs that are written by people that are probably not famous, or not probably, are not famous. A lot of the popular ones that I love, that I feel like are recommended a lot, that I don't really want to recommend to you again, is Crying in H Mart, an amazing one. Technically, I guess that could be a celebrity memoir since the author is in a famous band, but I don't think in her name alone she is a celebrity. But I mean, that's up to how you want to define it, since I did have a writer as a celebrity in my other recommendation. And then I have Glass Castle. It's one of my favorite books. I read it in high school, and it really changed my love for reading and has always really stuck with me. And Educated. Educated is another good one. Similar to Glass Castle, it didn't have as much of an impact on me because I think I read it later on in my reading journey, but it is just as important and a really great read as well. So those are kind of like three that I love that are obviously recommended quite often. So I thought I would recommend some lesser recommended books. So my first recommendation is This Ordinary Stardust, A Scientist's Path from Grief to Wonder by Alan Townsend. I read an arc of this in the beginning of the year and was so excited to pick up my own copy. I think it came out in like July or August. And so I went and actually got a hardcover version of this. I really would like to go back and read it and highlight, because when I read the arc, I didn't think to annotate for future me who could copy those annotations into the physical. So I kind of have to go through and reread, and so that I can have this copy noted or annotated for myself. It is a book about a scientist who is also married to a scientist, and they have a young daughter, and his daughter and his wife both come down with different and very rare forms of brain cancer, and at the same time. And it's talking about like the probability of something that statistically unlikely to happen, and trying to bring some kind of reasoning to it using science. And there's only so much that science can fill the gaps in what they can prove and can't prove, and there's so much empty space that science just cannot fill with grief. And it is just such a beautiful book. It is sad. I will say that. It is a very sad book. But I took so much out of this. There's so many beautiful lines. And the ordinary stardust that comes from that saying, it's like that cliche Tumblr saying where it was like, we are all made of stardust or something like that. Like we are all created from stardust. And it takes that idea and kind of spins it and makes it so that, it kind of just puts perspective on this whole story. So, and this is a debut, and it was so beautifully written, and it's not a long book at all. It's like 250 pages, and it packs a punch, and I absolutely love this one. This is probably one of my top 5 reads of this year, because I just remember sobbing to it, and I don't sob to books very often. So It's beautiful. Please check it out if you haven't. And then the next one I have here is Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. I think she's a very popular author. This book is probably also pretty popular. It is her explaining a time in her life where I think it was 5 young men dear to her, including her beloved brother, are lost to accidents, murder, and suicide. And it says their deaths seemingly unconnected, but she's kind of connecting these deaths to our society, our culture, how these deaths could have been prevented, and how these men, particularly Black men in our society, are set up for failure, especially in certain parts of the world. And she's a beautiful, beautiful writer. As you can see, I've tabbed this one a lot. Let me see. Maybe I can just kind of do what I did with the other book and pick a random tab and read it to you. Oh, this is a great one as well. It says, "We all think we could have done something to save them, something to pull them from death's maw, to have said, 'I love you, you are mine.' We dream of speaking when we lack the gift of oratory, when we lack the vision to see the stage, the lights, the audience, the endless rigging and ropes and set pieces behind us, manipulated by many hands. Ronald saw it all, and it buried him." Obviously, when you read that in context, it's going to have such a deeper meaning. But I feel like even just superficially reading that, it holds so much weight, and how there is so many things in the background that is affecting people's lives, and, just surviving life. And it is such a beautiful story, not a story, a beautiful memoir. And this was my first Jesmyn Ward, and it makes me want to read more from her. So I loved this one, Men We Reaped. I also read this one this year. And then 2 books I don't actually have on me. The first one is Chanel Miller's Know My Name. This one arguably is very popular as well, but I think in certain niches of the book world, maybe you haven't heard of it yet. Chanel Miller was a girl that was in a very famous sexual assault case in California. She basically I think she was either roofied or she passed out at a college party and woke up, and she was sexually assaulted when she was unconscious. And famously, the public criticized her instead of her attacker, and blamed the victim instead of blaming the assailant. And the person that assaulted her got off super easy. And it's about her going through the beginning, during the trial, the aftermath, and kind of regaining her voice and putting her name out there. Before this book came out, she was known by, I think, like Jane Doe or some, anonymous name that wasn't made public. And so it's also an interesting part of the book is she sees people in her life react to this case, not knowing that she is the person that has been victimized. And it really puts a spin on, what people around you think about in those situations, in not knowing that you are the victim, and would their minds change knowing that they knew that person. And it's so heartbreaking to see all the things that she has to go through and the fallout after the verdict. And it's just her taking back her power and saying, this is my name is Chanel Miller, and this is my story, and know my name, and I'm not going to hide behind an anonymous name anymore. And it's powerful. I really loved it. I think it should be required reading for both girls and boys at a young age, because I think it really speaks volumes about the problems with our society, and the thought that goes through people's minds. It's not okay. And yeah, it's a great book. I definitely say please read that one. And then the last book I have on this list of just regular memoirs, this is a book I didn't read this year. I think I read it a year or 2 ago, but it is called Beautiful Boy. And this book is about a father's perspective of his son's addiction. So his son becomes addicted at a young age, I think in his teenage years, to drugs and alcohol. And as a parent watching your son and struggling and trying to help them and trying to give them everything they can to get out of this addiction, and there's only so much you can do as a parent, and trying to decide, when do I have to cut off that help so that they can finally realize that they need help. And it's that roller coaster battle of how far do I help, how far do I pull away. And addiction affects not only that person, but the parents, the siblings, the whole family, friends, and it's a very complicated web that it draws from. So it's a really beautiful book. It was actually adapted into a movie starring Steve Carell and Timothée Chalamet, and I think that movie was beautifully done as well. I think it's a great portrayal of that book, and it's really heartbreaking, and addiction is such a big thing in our world today, and such a thing that I feel like can and does touch most everybody in this world. So it is a beautiful book. It's also sad, but it's a hard read, but it's an important read as well. So now, kind of going a little bit away from the heavy stuff, I'm going to give you my quirky book recs, since I do love to read a quirky nonfiction book. The first one is probably the most popular, and this is John Green's The Anthropocene. I don't 100% know how to pronounce that word, the Anthropocene, I think it is. And anyways, it is just a collection of stories. I think he's going from A to Z, if I'm remembering correctly. And for each letter, he is talking about something in his world and talking about it and rating it on a scale of, I think he does like 5 stars. And so he'll talk about, like, I can't even remember some of them, but just as an example, like A, and he'll talk about apples or something in his life and how those affect his life. And he'll go, I'll give apples a 3 out of 5 stars at the end. So it's really quirky. It's really fun. He talks about really personal things to him and also things that are personal to everybody and more broad. And I think it's a really fun read. You don't have to read it consecutively. You can kind of just pick it up and read and then put it down, since it's not like a flowing story throughout, but it's really fun to read. I really enjoyed that one. And then we have Mary Roach. She does books on weird science. So she's done a book on the dead, like what happens to cadavers after people die, what happens to their bodies. She's done a book on space, all the weird things about space travel that you haven't thought of, like how do you go to the bathroom in 0 gravity? Have you ever thought about that? Probably not. And it's a very interesting explanation about what happens when you have to do that in space with no gravity. And then she has another one on the army. And this is like weird things that you wouldn't think of that affect the army and being in the army, sex and different, like kind of how the evolution of sex and public's perception of sex throughout history, as well as weird, quirky things about sex in all its fashions, all its ways. She has another one that I got, Fuzz, and it's about how nature and society interact, like how wildlife and nature, when they meet, how that is dealt with. I'm not explaining it very nicely, but anyways, she does really weird science books, and they're really fun. They center around a different topic for each book, and then she goes in, and each chapter is a different weird, quirky thing about that subject. It's really fun to read, really easy to read. She has a sense of humor as she's telling the story and the questions that she asks, and it just feels like you're talking to a friend and they're telling you some weird stuff that you didn't know you'd be interested in. And then similar to that one, I have Smoke Gets in Your Eyes, and I think this one's Caitlin Doherty. I'll have to put her, you'll see her name on the screen. And this is also similar to Mary Roach. She's talking about what happens to bodies at a crematorium, and it's pulling from a time in her life where she worked at a crematorium and her learning what you have to do to bodies to prepare them for a funeral. And it's also just kind of a weird, kind of dark insight into something that you don't think about and don't hear about very often. Okay, lastly, and these are my more challenging book reads. And these are just books that I feel like maybe if you're new to nonfiction, don't start with these. But if you've read some nonfiction, these might be some fun picks for you. My first one is going to be Braiding Sweetgrass, and this is by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And it says Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants. So this is, the author is a Indigenous person who is also a scientist, and she studies botany and nature. So she's pulling her scientific studies along with her Indigenous knowledge that has been passed down through her family and her community, and the gaps that science misses that can be filled with Indigenous knowledge. It is so interesting. It is very dense at times, but I think if you take this book and you take your time with it, it is so beautiful. The connections that she makes, it just really makes you look at things differently. Don't know if I've ever read a book quite like this. I don't think I have. This is such a unique book, and I really want to get to her other novels. I know she has a new one coming out next year that I'm really excited about. As you can see, tabbed this one up. Let's open up to like maybe an earlier tab. The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we don't know yet. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to us all. We can starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual. And so I think this was talking about how trees react to each other and how they start growing and how they pause and then they bloom, and how oddly trees do this together. And there's something out there that makes them all, that signals them all to do it and signals them all to stop and connect. It's basically something connects all of these trees and plants in nature, and we don't know quite what that is yet, but it is very similar to humans. Like, if we all succeed, we can all succeed together. But if some of us starve, then we all starve together. It's a beautiful metaphor. And there's so many beautiful metaphors in here that really make you think. This is just a gorgeous book. I love it so much. And then we have There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abdurraqib. I read this book this year. It came out this year. It is a book about him growing up in Ohio. And he kind of uses the story of LeBron James kind of being a hometown hero in basketball and growing up and becoming the star of the Cleveland Cavaliers in Ohio, and kind of the intersection and crossing of his life and LeBron James, and just different things about basketball and basketball history, the hardships of growing up as a minority. And it is really beautiful. It is broken up in 4 sections, like 4 quarters of basketball. So it's really interesting. And then he breaks it up even within there, and he has timeouts, he has intermissions, like so uniquely done. And I haven't read anything that is structured like that. I tabbed it a lot. There's so many beautiful things. I think some of it went over my head because it is very prosy and poetic. But if you like that kind of style of writing and you love to read just poetic, beautiful writing about life, then this is your book. And even if you don't like basketball, you can still follow along with it and enjoy it. And this was such a great read. I loved this one as well. And then just to kind of like pick out a random tab here, and it said, I didn't know the kid who was shot a few blocks south of here on Christmas Eve. I knew he was younger than me and he could hoop. I'd seen him at the park in my old neighborhood once or twice. Quick first step, never passed, but could get to the rim anytime he wanted. The bullet that hit him wasn't meant for him, but the bullet doesn't apologize and isn't especially discerning. The bullet only knows what is in front of it. I don't trust people who don't love a place to understand how that place remembers its dead. The living who throw an item the dead once cherished towards heaven. Wrap it around the highest wire, so high that it looks like the shoes are swinging from the sky itself, like 2 legs are hanging down from the edge of a cloud. This is obviously talking about when you see shoes hanging from a telephone wire, and I didn't know that symbolizes, or that people do that to throw somebody's favorite shoes up onto a wire to symbolize them hanging from heaven, and it is a way to mourn somebody. I'd always just seen shoes on wires and been like, how did those shoes get up there? Like, why are they up there? But apparently there is a lot of symbolism to it, and this book talks about that and touches on it, and it's really beautiful. So I'm really glad I read this one this year. I actually have this author's other book that came out, I think, a year or 2 ago, called A Little Devil in America. I'm really excited to read this one as well, and it is in praise of Black performance. And I think it is talking about, obviously, Black performance in America during the 1960s, 70s, 50s, probably in that time period. So I am super excited to get to this one as well. So this video ended up being much longer than I thought. I thought I was just gonna do like a little casual book chat today, but this is probably a much longer video than I expected. But hopefully you got some good nonfiction recommendations there. Maybe there's some that you want to add to your TBR for next year or for your holiday shopping. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.